All right, genetics kids. Let's look at the question we started yesterday. So as we were talking about, we were looking at the mice and we're looking at their two different color fur. One mouse has dark fur, one mouse has light fur. And what they want you to do is tie it back to what's happening at the molecular level to explain what we see at the physical level. So that's phenotype. So I think looking at this, I actually have covered the requirements for this question. So we will kind of go through it through the NCEA marking schedule, just so you guys can see how points break down and how you'll be assessed. So we're just looking at A. We haven't done B yet. When we are looking at A, and I'm going to start color coding things because you know me, I like to color code. I just want to show you guys where achieve points are, merit points are, and excellence points are, so you can see how things break down. Since this is your first year of doing NCEA, I also want to explain how the point system works so you know how you're getting your grades on your tests. So, first off, when we look at our NCEA answer, our marking schedule, you'll see a section here called evidence. That is the full answer. So this is basically the model answer. Your grades are determined based off of how much information is in your answer. Achieve points are basically looking at things like surface level learning. So have you gotten definitions, those sort of things. Merit level is typically looking for have you linked your answer. So how are you doing things like because and therefore as your explanation. Excellence then is really looking at that big picture thinking. Are you thinking about the material as a whole? Have you tied the whole story together? Excellence often includes comparison, so saying comparing two things together. Excellence also commonly includes things like tying it back to the question. So since this example talks about fur color and mice, you should be talking about fur color and mice. The thing with genetics is that there is going to be an overarching amount of content that you're going to use for answering all your questions. But what changes is how you then tie it to the example they've provided. So do keep that in mind. Even though we're looking at mice in this example, you can still use this answer for if we're talking about plants or tigers or kiwis or whatever. So some things to keep in mind as well is you will see that with each question you are given, there are little bullet points. And those bullet points then are going to be how many points are available. So in question number 2, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways that you can get achieve points. So we've only done A. This is talking about A and B together. The other thing to keep in mind is that they count up how many that you have, and then that determines your grade. So say, for example, let's say you've gotten 2 achieve points. You would get an A3 on your exam. Are we okay with that so far? All right. Then you have the merit points. There was 1, 2, 3, 4 ways to get merit, and they were, again, pretty generous. If you got one of the merit points, any of those 4, you got an M5. If you got 2 of the merit points, then you were able to get an M6. The last one is excellence. Excellence are a little bit more rare because in that case, we're looking at tying all the answers. In this case, we have 1, 2. And again, one of the excellence points is an E7. Both of them is an E8. You will have 3 questions. So you have a total of 24 points that are available to you. Each year, the cutoff lines are slightly different. Roughly between, I would say, 19 to 20 is where the cutoff for excellence is. So any combination of points that gets you to like 19 or 20 points. So for example, I can get an E8 for 2 of my questions on the exam. That gets me 16 points. And let's say then for the last question, you only got an achieved and you got 4 points. The 8 and 4 adds together to 20, so you still can get an excellence overall. Does that make sense of how their point system works? We good? We good? Okay, just making sure that makes sense. The other thing about NCEA marking is that it's top-down marking. So they give you the highest possible mark, and then they work their way down. So for example, let's say for question number 2A, you've gotten an excellence on it, but you bomb out on question B. Let's say you even leave it blank. You still have 1 excellence point, and so they're going to go from the top down. So you don't have 2 excellence points, you don't have an E8, but you do have 1 excellence point, so you get an E7. So they're always going to go from the top to the bottom. They're trying to give you the best combination of points. If you don't have enough for a certain grade, let's say you don't have the 2 merit points, then they can do other things to combine your points together to still get you to pass. But whatever they do, they're always going to give you the best option. Okay? A merit for your overall exam script is roughly between 14 and 15. And then achieved is normally somewhere between 7 and 9, I would say. It depends on the exam question. So you add all those points together. So not every single one of your exam questions needs to be at excellence level to get excellence overall. Okay? Cool. So for this first question here, we've only done question A, which is fine. There was some achieved points. The first achieved point was that you have 2 definitions. So you define gene, you define allele, you define DNA using the context of the fur. What we can see in my answer is I have defined gene, a section of DNA, so that one's good. And I have also defined allele. I've talked about the differences in the sequence. The other thing I could add for my allele as a definition is we could say variations of the gene. So in this case, my gene is for fur color, and we're talking about the variations in the fur color. Cool. I have not actually defined DNA, which is not good on my part. So let's define DNA. DNA is the carrier for genetic code, genetic information. It is the code of life. So we'll add that in there so we have all 3 of our definitions. Now, I want you guys to be mindful that the answer that I've written here is not like an answer you guys should be providing on the exam. I've just written this way to kind of go over as notes. You guys will obviously structure it in a far nicer manner than I have. So, looking at that, because I have 2 out of the 3 definitions, I would be able to get an achieved point on that question. We good? Okay. The second one was to describe the structure of DNA. Well, I have done that because I've drawn my little picture here for my DNA, and I've also shown that double helix. So they would be able to give me an achieved point there as well. The last one is understanding a difference in the DNA sequence produces a different phenotype, an appearance, or protein. All of those would be potential ways to say it. And I have shown that here. I've shown one sequence, I've shown another sequence, and I've shown that one of them is resulting in dark fur, one of them is resulting in light fur. So that's, again, another way I could get an achieved. So I do have an achieved level answer, at least. Cool. Keep going. All right. The thing that's going to be a bit tricky about genetics is that they don't really have a good way to kind of distinguish between achieve, merit, and excellence, because sometimes it's just about, like, they use very vague language like explain or in-depth or fully comprehend. So it's all kind of like flowery language, whereas the other sciences are much more distinct on what we're looking for. What we're looking for the merit then is an explanation about how the DNA gives a new instruction. So what we're talking about then in this case is that if my DNA sequence changes, then that's going to give a different instruction, make a different protein, and my hair color will be different. Trying to see what they got. So in this case, if I want to move up to merit level, I like to do achieved in red, merit in blue, excellence in green. So I haven't actually explained what I mean when I'm looking at the DNA sequence and the fur color. So if I wanted to get this up to a merit level, I would be saying the different fur color is a result of the different sequence. For example, and then I can have this as my example. So the different phenotype is because of the change in the gene sequence. So that's what I'm saying. My answer was very much just notes. It wasn't actually looking at explanations. And again, I'm using the word because. It's going to be one of your favorite words. Sorry, it's kind of squished in there. It's not as nice as I would like. We okay? All right. So the next merit point that we're looking at is explaining the difference in the DNA sequence that is resulting in the different alleles. So I would be making a note here that the sequence has changed from TA to GC. So you can see I can start like I'm trying to explain what I'm drew down or wrote down. So that's why I'm putting that as like the bluish color. Cool. And then the excellence here is then that full linkage to the change in the DNA, resulting in a different allele, resulting in a different gene color. So you can see what I'm saying. It's kind of vague when it comes to genetics, unfortunately. It's kind of like that. Are we okay so far? So this is actually taken from the 2016 exam. So this is an example of what the marking schedule is like. It's going to change. It's going to be a slightly different question. They might divide up the points differently depending on the question itself. But it should more or less be quite similar in what they're expecting. An achieve level answer should just be definitions. A merit level answer, you're actually linking it. An excellence level answer basically has all of the merit components. So you can see here, an excellence level answer would be the combination of these two things put together to make a much more comprehensive answer. Yeah? Right, we good? Keep going? Okay. Back page. All right. On the back here, we have, again, talking about the mouse, the dark color is a capital D and it's dominant to the light color fur, which is our lowercase d. Each mouse has two alleles for fur color, which makes sense because we inherit one from mom and one from dad. Explain how they inherit these two alleles and explain how these two alleles interact to produce different phenotypes. So how do we inherit, and also how these alleles produce different phenotypes. Again, they give you bullet points, and use these bullet points to help you with your answer. So for example, they want you to define phenotype and genotype. They want you to explain how the alleles are inherited from the parents. And they want you to state the three possible fur-colored genotypes for the rocket mouse. So again, lots of different things we can do. I'm just going to start going through it and then adding more and more to our answer. So first thing, if we're not sure how to get started, write down your definitions. So when we talk about genotype, what are we talking about? Steal it. I don't know, I haven't tested it yet. Then we just throw it out. We couldn't get a tip to clean up the science for men anyway. Huh? No? You can take that one. I know. All right. So genetics kids, do we remember what genotype means? The genetic makeup? Yeah? When I think about the genotype, how many alleles do I have? Got 2 alleles. So genotype are the 2 alleles that you inherit. I should say an organism. From each parent. 1. So I've given my definition for genotype. When I think about my genotype, there are 3 possible genotypes that I could have. I could have capital D, capital D. Do you remember what that one is referred to? Homozygous dominant. What if I have big D and little d? Heterozygous, good. And then little d, little d? Homozygous. So homo means the same. Think homosexual, heterosexual, same or different. All right, so we've gotten the 3 possible genotypes. Done that bit. Cool. All right, the next thing I then need to talk about is phenotype. So again, we're putting down another one of our definitions. So phenotype is talking about the physical trait. What is being expressed? What do we kind of see? The end product. So we have 2 possible physical traits, and that is dark fur or light fur. If I am homozygous dominant, what color fur should I have? Dark. If I'm heterozygous, what should I have? Dark as well. If I'm homozygous recessive, like what? Yeah, like. Cool, we've given our definitions and we've given the possible genotypes. Tied it all together. Cool. All right, the last one of those bullet points then is talking about how do we inherit these alleles from our parents. So when we're thinking about that, we are thinking about how organisms would get that. So the first, we get 1 allele from the female, and that is through the egg. And then you get 1 allele from the male, and that is through the sperm. And then when we get fertilization, they come together, and then you get your genotype. Cool. So if my parent was capital D, what possible alleles could it pass on? It can only pass on the 1, so it can only pass on the capital D to its offspring. If my parent is heterozygous, it can pass on a capital D or a lowercase d. And if my parent is homozygous recessive, it can only pass down the D, the little d. And you guys have done Punnett squares then. So this is tying into the Punnett square idea where you have your parents. This is referring to the gametes, is the fancy word we use to refer to sperm and egg. Which is just our way of saying sex cells. So these on the top are representing the parents, and they're representing each one of the possibilities when it comes to what they give in their gametes. And then the things inside the box is representing the offspring and what the offspring inherit. So if I was to pull that down, this would be capital D, capital D, capital D, lowercase d, capital D, lowercase d, lowercase d, lowercase d. Okay so far? This one's actually a nicer question than the previous one because it's far more easy to scaffold. All right, let's see how the points break down then. So looking at our points, we have the achieved. It actually looks like there might be actually 6 here by this way that is. I think it just is missing a dot. All right. Defines phenotype or states that the phenotypes are light and dark fur. So very, very generous with that question. Second one says defines genotype as the alleles present or state that you know what the genotypes would be. Capital D, lowercase d, lowercase d, capital D, lowercase d. Last way you could get an achieved is describing how the mouse inherits an allele from each parent. So lots of ways you can get the achieved. Merit is the explanation. So given the phenotypes coded, the 3 different genotypes, and explain why capital D, lowercase d is not light and instead dark. So in this case, this one here, we're just explaining that to be heterozygous, the dominant trait is going to always be expressed if present. So dominant allele is always expressed if present. And in this case, the recessive allele is only expressed if the dominant is absent. Better? Oh, good. Okay. So in our heterozygous, since it does have one of the dominant alleles, it's going to go for the dark fur and not the light fur. Cool. All right. Second merit point then was 1 copy of each allele from each parent combined through fertilization to form our offspring. Cool. Oh, get this one off. Yeah. Yeah. And then for the excellence, we are looking at for a full explanation, linking inheritance for 1 copy of each allele from each parent through the sperm and egg, and then returned through fertilization, and then making sure you basically have all the answers. So the difference between the merit and the excellence is basically you have both merit points. So I guess that's why they were quite generous with the merit, because when you look at it, if you had the 2 merit points from the part A or part B, you would automatically be more or less getting the excellence point. Whereas if you didn't answer either of those questions fully, you could get 1 merit point from A, 1 merit point from B, 2 merit points, M6. I wouldn't recommend that you go in with the strategy of, I'm just going to answer 1 question and leave the other one blank, because this was a generous marking schedule. That doesn't always happen. Okay? Answer everything, take a guess. Worst case scenario, if you don't know how to answer the question, write down your definitions. Okay? You're better off getting like an N2 than an N0. If you leave it blank, you get an N0. If you attempt it, you very often can get at least a couple points, and an N1 and an N2 might be enough to push you over the line. If you're saying, for example, let's say you got an A4, so that's 8 points, and the achieved criteria is getting 9, you have one answer that's an N1, that gives you enough to get a low achieved. You see what I'm saying? So it's worth answering everything. You want to like scrap as many points as possible because it could make the difference between a grade boundary. Never, ever, ever leave anything blank on these exams. Okay? Cool. Okay, so bio kids, or sorry, I should say genetics kids. You guys have a choice on what you want to work on. You can work on the SciPad, or you can start looking at the collated questions. I think I've linked them on Google Classroom. No Brain Too Small is basically taken all of the DNA and its role questions from all the different exam years, and you can actually do practice after practice after practice just to see how they ask the same question in a different way. Okay? And then I'm going to move on to the mechanics kids. Bathroom?